breaking down everyday workplace issues and diagnosing the hidden sickness, not just the obvious symptom. Our hosts, James and Kobe.
Did we lose a patient?
No, that's just my lunch.
Hey, thanks for joining us. I'm Kobe, he's James, and we're going to do something a little bit different today. We're going to answer some questions posed to us by our faithful listeners. So, James, I'm going to ask you the first question is we're just going to jump right into it, all right?
Okay.
So, this is a question that's kind of more of a kind of common thing that's coming up in a lot of conversations with clients and partners and everything. So I think that this is good for us to kind of bring it up and talk about it here. So here's a question, all right? Are organizations underutilizing how they build and use their HR policies?
Yep. Next.
Thank you for that insight, James.
Yeah. Brilliant, right? But yes, and I can see where this question comes from, because what I see so often is that policies are developed to make sure that we're hitting the bare minimum, that we are not going to be contravening any laws. So they're written and developed by the vast majority of organizations to meet that one outcome. Let's protect the company and make sure, which is very important. Let's not undersell that. But policies are the floor. They are the bare minimum that you have to provide so that you don't find yourself in hot water legally. And that is I won't say it's the mistake, but it is the missed opportunity that most companies have when it comes to their policy development, is that they keep it at the floor, not recognizing that you can build off of that and you are allowed to provide more than the bare minimum. It's something that we strongly encourage in our work. And so are companies underutilizing how they build and what was it? Build and use? Policy?
Build and use. Yep.
Yeah. Yes, they are, because it's this. We look at them as a very narrowly defined tool rather than something that can be built off of and actually improve the employee experience.
Yeah. And it's always funny because when we do policy reviews, and it is something that we do as part of our investigations and as part of our work that we do with clients, it's something that is always kind of a biggest area for, or biggest opportunity for improvement, because people have this kind of weird, I guess almost like minimalist attitude when it comes to policies. And we often hear things like, well, when we talk about, the policies being more robust and, I don't know, being more, like kind of more clear and provide like intentional protections or those kind of things. They're like, well, we're not a big corporation. We're not a huge multinational. Do we need that? We're like, well, yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where you actually have an opportunity to have a greater, clearer, more transparent impact on your small team. Then, so it's actually more important, or it's actually a bigger asset in a sense for the smaller companies to take it on. So when we do the reviews, we really want to make sure that they're, that their policies are actually serving their intended purpose, not just meeting their bare minimum expectation.
Yeah. And expectation is important. That's kind of what I wanted to pick up on here, is because this is one of the first ways that you will start to set and manage expectations with your employees, is by the policies or the rules that govern the workplace, right? So if the expectation that you set is that we only do the bare minimum, that expectation can be carried through in how employees engage in their work, right? So, but if we set the expectations that, here's the bare minimum is not enough. It's not good enough for us because we are committed to providing X, Y, or Z, right? It's that expectation is very different from um, we are going to provide the bare minimum we're allowed to without being sued.
Right. And I think that that's probably where a lot of this normalization of bare minimum policies come from, because a lot of times they're only written, they're often written by like an HR lawyer, or they're written kind of with that total intention of this is just what you have in place to ensure that you can stand up to litigation or any kind of legal issue.
Yeah.
And we won't lie, when we often work with companies and help them make their policies more robust and more intentional, they say, well, our lawyers aren't going to like this. Like, well, they should. I mean, you're being more clear. We're not diminishing the
Yeah.
liability. We're making there's stuff that protects you that has to remain, but then there's stuff that you're committing to. There's stuff that you're showing the intention with. This is a clear, transparent, company-wide, equitable statement of
Yeah.
what you want your purpose is. So when we do our assessments, we kind of have a policy matrix that we use to scale this to score them, and we kind of have four areas that we score them on. I hope I'm not giving away too much of trade secrets here, but the we assess them for a level 1, which means that they're just written and available. You've got a policy, it's on paper, someone could look at it if they want to. If checking the box was the
Yeah.
goal, you check the box.
Yes.
But that's a level 1. Level 2.
One is bad, or
Yes.
the lowest.
Yeah, 1 is the lowest. I mean, you want at least a 1. You don't want to have a 0 in that category where
That's
it is
true.
not there, right? So, but then beyond that, and this is where most people are like, oh, we can go beyond that, is level 2 is it designed for operational like for operational need? Like, does it meet the operational requirements? Like, is it about tying why this policy is here to how it affects the operational,
Yeah.
like needs, right? And it's optimization is the word that I was struggling to find. So is it optimized for operations? So, and that is about tying it back to the reason why we have this communication policy, for example, is because it improves our operation, like defining why it's there and how it
Yeah.
ties back to operational success is a level 2, and that's a great asset because you're connecting the dots to why this policy is here. It's not so we don't get sued. It's
Yeah.
so our operations can be improved.
And we do see this level being hit with relative frequency from companies that have if we kind of go back to the faces of HR framework that we've talked about many times.
Mhm.
For those that really take that humans required mentality, or for buzzwordy language, progressive companies,
Mhm.
this mentality, we see it quite frequently. So
Mhm.
it's not that this is something that is not achievable or on your own, or it's not something that you may already be doing. It is a very valuable build upon the foundation piece.
Right. Right. Exactly. And then, but that's still only a level 2.
Yeah.
A level 3 is it optimized for employee and employee performance. And what that can look like is statements like our safety policies are designed so that employees go home in the same condition that they arrived in. Like statements like that, commitments that tie back to
Yeah.
employee well-being and employee performance and employee and prioritizing the employee, how this impacts our culture, how this impacts our people, how this impacts the work that people do. And that is something that is a lot less common,
Mhm.
but is something where we say, and this is usually kind of where we try and move companies from a 1 to a 2, or sorry, from a 2 to a 3, from a optimized for operations to optimized for employee performance.
Mhm.
And that's usually kind of where a lot of the work we do around policy work comes from. And that's again how we look at performance metrics. How do we look at recruitment processes? How do all those kind of things are usually trying to move people from operational need to a employee performance need. And then where we do less, but where it's always a great thing to move towards is a level 4, which is optimized for scalability.
Yeah.
And this is why I say it's a very beneficial thing for you, for small growing businesses to know about that. How are the way that you're defining your policies today going to be able to allow you to leverage growth, so you're planning for your scalability. You're not trying to just keep everything at this manageable, everything's outside of our desk level. You're actually designing things with intention, with the plan to scale, if that is a big part of your business goals and outcomes.
We see this being a stumbling block for people a lot when they develop their policies fairly early on in the growth of the company, and then it sits on a shelf for years.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
If the way that you structure policies, especially operational pieces, are going to be very different when you're a team of 30 or 50 than it is when you're a team of 400 or 500 or 1,000, right?
Mhm.
The what we've seen is policies that sit on a shelf that are checked maybe every year to are we still in legal compliance, but not checked for any of the other dimensions that you just talked about. And that's a huge missed opportunity. And it's also a big limiting factor because sometimes the way that we design policies, especially early on in the growth of our organizations, they no longer fit when we outgrow them.
Mhm.
And we're still trying to use the same policies that we used when we were a much different company.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we often, so when we have these conversations with clients, they're like, well, how big is this policy manual going to end up being? Or so we're like, this ends up being a very robust document. They're like, well, employees are never going to read that. We're like, well, no, of course they're not. Because, like what, but like, they're not reading your current policies now, to be really honest.
Yeah.
So we talk about, the value of creating an employee handbook. They're like, well, we have an employee handbook. That's what our policy manual is called. We're like, whoa, 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 whoa.
Yeah.
There's a big difference between a policy handbook and a policy manual.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, it's always funny having that conversation because even as somebody who actually likes policies, doing a policy review and reading through somebody's entire policy manual is a chore, right? As
Yep.
an employee, you can't expect that your employees are actually going to read through your policy manual and understand what's in there and the protections that they have. You need to understand the audience that it's communication.
Mhm.
It comes back to communication again, right? You need to communicate with people in a way that they are going to understand. So if your employees need to know what the rules are, what the expectations are that are set out in your policies. If you hand them a 50 or 150 page policy manual, it will never get looked at
Yeah.
until there's a problem. And then people are trying to find the right information going, oh, shit, what am I supposed to be doing?
Mhm.
Um, but an employee manual that summarizes the key points and then points them to where they can find more complete or the full policy for if they need more information beyond that, that's a great way to tailor your message to the audience in a way that's going to be meaningful for them.
Yeah. So and so usually the policy handbook is like usually 10 times smaller than the
Yeah.
policy manual. And it's written in plain language with just citations of where the full policy is. And again, we're sometimes like, well, the lawyer doesn't want us to have a handbook. Well, no. Again, the idea is this is a summary of it that with full
Yeah.
citation and with language at the
You,
very
you
beginning that
throw a
says
disclaimer at the beginning that says that the
any
policy manual
conflict.
supersedes anything written in the employee handbook. If there is a discrepancy between what's stated here and what's stated in the official policy manual takes precedent, right? That way, if you're updating things and something gets changed and updated in your policy manual that doesn't then make it into your employee handbook, you're still protected against, that conflict. It's just CYA, right? A brief disclaimer at the beginning can really mitigate a lot of that.
Well, but again, a lot of the stuff that tends to end up in the policy, because not every policy is referenced in the policy handbook. It's usually the stuff that
Employee
employees.
handbook.
Sorry, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so all the stuff in the policy manual does not often end up in the employee handbook. The employee handbook is usually the stuff that they need to know. Like it's like statements like, we have a per diem when you travel for meals of like of this and this, and then beneath it is just kind of the where they can find the full description of how to claim it and everything like that in the policy handbook, or sorry, in the policy manual, if that's what's needed.
Yeah.
And it really is just kind of it's again, it's a summary of. But so usually a lot of the legal requirements, legal compliance stuff doesn't always end up in there. Some of the stuff around like the kind of equitable treatment and harassment,
Yep.
those kinds of things will. But again, summarize briefly, but say the full description is in the policy manual. Those kinds of things are. It's really just a matter. It's like a Cole's notes, or
Yeah.
it's a short summary of, right? But
We've
it's
found
not
it as a helpful tool for a lot of companies.
exactly. Yeah.
So it's something that we encourage you to consider if you don't already have a tool like this, or if you do have a tool like this, when was the last time it was actually reviewed and developed and looked at from a mentality of, did we just check a box? Putting our policies and our employee handbook together, or did we actually design it with intent around operational efficiency, what employees need, and how it's going to remain relevant as we continue to grow and scale?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think to kind of put the bookend on this one question, yes, a lot of companies underutilize what a policy manual could, or what policies can be, and it could be more about just more than just protecting yourself. It can actually be about ensuring clear statements of what you're providing for employees, making your intentions known, about preparing the company for optimize employee performance and optimizing for scalability. It can be part of that. It doesn't have to just be get it done by a lawyer, put it on the shelf, only pull it out when someone gets fired.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be that, and it shouldn't be that.
Yeah. Please don't let it be that.
No,
Yeah, I suspect that if you're listening to this podcast or have been for any amount of time, you recognize the value in going beyond the bare minimum.
absolutely.
All right, let's look at the second question, Kobe. What's one thing that you would recommend to improve our workplace culture?
Okay, so that is a good question.
One thing. So I'm gonna make sure
Ah,
you don't go off on a tangent.
okay, because I had a tangent kind of
I
bubble
could
to.
see it. I could see it brewing. Yeah.
All right. I think if I had to pick one thing, it would probably be communication. And you kind of alluded to that earlier, but it's all about
Yeah.
communication. Communication really is kind of one of those fundamental, it's the grease that keeps the gears moving in a sense. Like it really is kind of that thing, that really is probably so important, both, internal communication and external communication. Because I mean, when we talk about, like we talk about how vital, managers and direct supervisors are to the employee experience and the workplace culture and all other kind of stuff. And one of our biggest piece of advice that we give to new managers and to kind of like any manager really or supervisor is be able to set and manage expectations. And largely that is a communication tool. It's about
Yeah.
communicating what you're expecting, not thinking this person can read my mind. If I give them, some generalities, they'll figure it out for themselves to my standards, being transparent and getting that out there. And I mean, I'd also say that as far is also probably essential because it really is about, being open to two-way communication, getting feedback, hearing constructive criticism, looking at, hearing the employee voice so you can respond well. So having those channels that can allow you to collect information. And probably I would say that it's the kind of thing that is the foundational pieces to making our workplaces kind of more inclusive, right? Hearing people, letting everybody know, keeping everyone on the same page, and making sure that and providing any kind of transparency. Transparency really is heavily involved in communication. So I think if I had to pick one thing, I'm pretty sure I'm going to say that communication is probably going to be the one thing that would make a big difference in improving someone's workplace culture.
I don't disagree with you. Communication is really important, but I think I'd have a bit of a
Sounds like you're going to disagree with me.
yeah. I mean, I don't like agreeing with you on anything. It rubs me the wrong way.
That is true.
Um, but as important, yeah. I think what is going to have a greater impact is consistency rather than communication.
Okay.
Communication is important, but if it's not consistent, if the way that the manager acts is not consistent with what they say, right?
Oh.
If my behaviors are, if I say one thing and do another, that is an incredibly damaging thing around workplace culture, right?
Hmm.
Consistency to me is the most foundational, fundamental aspect of moving the needle in terms of the experience that people have with work on a daily basis. Having an inconsistent manager, having inconsistent expectations, having inconsistent communication, having inconsistent like
Hmm.
if I show up to work every day and I don't know what to expect because my manager could be my best friend or an absolute nightmare, it doesn't matter how good the organization's communication is with me. I'm walking into that situation tense, ready for a fight, and with my backup.
Hmm.
And those are not traits that will contribute to a positive work environment. So I would say consistency is key because, and I've used this phrase before. I've mentioned this several times on the podcast before that I've had far too much firsthand interactions with inconsistent managers. And really, the key for me is that inconsistency looks like insanity.
Right. No, that is a very good point and a very good argument. Um, I definitely see what you're saying. I do think that I'm trying to figure out if I agree with you or I just see your point, but it doesn't change my opinion. I'm trying to figure that out right now. Because
Well,
largely,
we could have a cop out answer that the one most important thing that you can do is here's the two things. Um,
and we may end up there, but I do
they're
think
both important, but sorry,
are.
I'm interrupting you. Well, I'm not that
Yes.
sorry, but go ahead.
Yeah, no one's surprised you're interrupting me.
Yeah.
Um, really, I mean, if you think about it though, like there's, inconsistency is you're right, is very, very damaging. Consistency is good. But I mean, like I think that part of good communication is there's an implication that there is consistent, right? I mean, you can't have good communication and not be consistent. Like that's almost like a
Yes,
prerequisite.
that's
So,
fair. Yeah,
right?
I'll
So
concede that.
yeah, so the idea that, people need to be informed, people need to be aware of stuff, even if stuff's not great, they need to know. There needs to be kind of clear, dedicated channels and everything kind of like that. So I mean, it's something that, being consistent is important, but but consistency isn't necessarily things are positive. It just means that it's reliably the same. Even it's reliably the samely terrible. Like there are consistently bad communicators and consistently bad communication structures that, is still just as damaging because no one knows what's going on. Everyone's in the dark, right? So, I mean, so there is that side of it too. That communication, is, I mean, there's a bit of an it's implied that good communication will be consistent, but I mean, you know, yeah. So, but I also kind of really do see your point. I'm struggling here.
So I'm willing. I agree with you. I'll concede the point on good communication is consistent by the definition of being good.
Okay.
Um, However, if somebody is good at communicating
Hmm.
and they're consistently communicating,
Hmm.
but the environment is not consistent, the expectations that whether it's from the direct, so
Mhm.
where the organization's communications to people could be streamlined and very consistent and excellently framed,
Yeah.
but the expectations that are placed on them are not consistent. The
Mhm.
way that their managers or supervisors or the periphery interact with people is not the same, is not consistent. If I'm treated differently than someone else, and there's not that equitability involved in consistently how we behave among, how I treat my team is consistent, regardless of whether they're my best friend or they drive me up the bloody wall, right? I
Mhm.
I see your point, and I'm not going to argue that communication is not important,
Right.
because it absolutely is.
Mhm.
But I'm un I guess I'm just unwilling to move my opinion on consistency. I've seen it have such a incredibly negative impact
Yeah.
when there's inconsistency, that it's going to be really hard to move me on this.
Well, I'm not surprised that you're being consistent in your convictions. But
Do you see how reassuring it is when somebody's consistent?
well, I mean, and you've said this before, again, in sessions and on the podcast, everything like that too, that that you'd rather somebody be consistently bad than inconsistent.
100%, because at least I know how to deal with you. If you're consistently bad, then I will, well, I mean, this is part of my personality, and I'm not saying do this, but I will ignore you. I'll move around you, or I'll do what I need to do, in spite of how consistently bad you are.
Yeah. Yeah, and there is something we said that we all know those people that we work with who they're maybe they're not great communicators, or they're not very good at their job, or or their personality is kind of abrasive or whatever like that. But when we get to know them, and we see that they're consistent with that, we can find workarounds, find
Yes.
different ways, figure out how to utilize them in limited capacity or whatever it is. And that does make it easier than if one day they're a rock star, the next day they're an absolute nightmare. And that is a really, really good point.
I know. I
I,
mean, thank
yeah,
you.
yeah, it's actually it hurts me a little bit
Yeah.
to compliment your point there. But I do think though that good communication and good, especially good internal comm systems, people
Mhm.
being in the know, all that kind of stuff does do a lot in the way of mitigating consistency in some ways and stuff like that too. But I'm also not.
Effective communication will improve consistency,
But it's not the
but
same.
it doesn't supersede
No, and it
consistency.
doesn't solve problems that of inconsistency. But I'm not sure if I'm willing to bend either.
I'm
So,
okay with you being wrong. That doesn't bother me.
all right. So maybe we're in a position we can come to agree to disagree and go back to your original cop-out answer of the one thing you need is two things.
Yeah.
I think that does have to be where we end with this.
But
But
yeah, communication, you're pick one, do it well, and
yeah.
then do the other well.
Yeah, and maybe that's it. And I think that there's probably enough overlap and crossover that it's something that, but let's be serious too. In what workplace can you do one thing and everything else, it causes a ripple effect and everything else gets improved, right?
Yeah.
It's, this is the thing about workplaces is that they're so complex that you can't just think, we'll just carve out this one thing and there's going to be a solution. I do think it's prioritizing is important, but realizing that you need to have a kind of a multi-prong approach
Yeah.
to make significant, sustainable improvements.
Well, and we need to go back to kind of the language that we often use is, what are you trying to achieve?
Hmm.
Right? If you know what you're trying to actually move the needle on, then understanding what do I need, what needs to exist first for this to be successful, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Is communication, is improving our communications what is going to be the catalyst for change, or is improving the way that we interact with people in a consistent manner going to be the catalyst for change that will help us achieve the strategic vision or goal that we have set out?
But also, maybe there's a bit of a flaw in how someone might interpret the question as saying, what's the one quick fix that will improve our culture? There is no one quick fix. There is no one thing that will completely solve all the issues, right? It's about multi-solving problems, right?
Yeah.
It's the idea of, you need to have a bit of a tactical approach. No one needs to exist first before whatever you want to achieve will become
Right.
successful, but realizing that because of the complexity of it, you can't just expect
Yeah.
solving one problem will solve every problem.
And here's where the shameless plug comes in. This is why it's really important to investigate your workplace and understand what's causing the problems that you're experiencing.
Yeah.
So call us. We can help. All right, shameless plug done.
Yes, very shameless. You definitely ramped up the shamelessness on that plug. That
Oh,
was
I,
that
I can go further.
that was but that was some top-notch shameless.
Okay.
I'm sure the person listening is like, yeah, that's shameless.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move on to the last question. So I want to ask this one of you.
Okay.
Okay, so there's another one for that someone sent us. How do I make my team feel inclusive?
How do I make my team feel inclusive or included? Because those are two different questions. Did you change the language or is that what they actually wrote? How do I make my team feel inclusive?
This is actually what they actually wrote. The actual language was, how do I make my team feel inclusive? So I think so if I had to interpret
Okay.
that language, it's about how do I create a sense of
Of
inclusivity,
inclusivity, of belonging,
of
right?
belonging within my team. How
Yeah.
do I
So
make
I'm not, yeah. Okay.
reality, not just say you're included, you're included, you're included. How do I make this environment, this atmosphere of inclusiveness and belonging?
Okay. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about is psychological safety. To me, that is the bedrock of inclusion and belonging.
Mhm.
Because if people do not feel psychologically safe
Yeah,
to show who they actually are, to bring themselves their full self to work in a professional way, let's not lose that aspect of it.
yeah,
But if people feel that they need to hide who they are, if they feel that they can't share their opinions, or the team will ridicule them, or the manager will ridicule them, or there will be some reprisal for that. If psychological safety does not exist, you will not have inclusion.
yeah.
Full stop.
Mhm.
That's what needs to exist first, before we can even build on, have any other conversation around what else does it take to make my team feel inclusive. So I would start with that. I think that is probably the certainly not the easiest, but is the best starting point in my opinion.
Well, do you know what actually this I want to kind of jump back to the first question about policies, because what you kind of said, it reminds me of working we worked with a client a little while ago, and we were doing that policy review where we use our matrix and everything like
Yep.
that, specifically around psychological safety. We were trying
Yes.
to improve psychological safety for this, for this exact reason, in their organization by creating protections and commitments and statements of psychological safety. And it was one of those things that was um, so eye-opening to them when because they wanted this sense of psychological safety. They wanted this sense of, open door policies. They wanted this kind of sense of employees sharing it. But it was almost like, well, how do we do that? We're like, well, is you need to protect that into your policies. And they were like, you can do that. Like that kind of goes into the whole question about, well, our lawyers, so you can, so that whole thing. So it's one of those things where we're talking about those things about optimizing kind of like, employee performance, enshrining, protecting, committing to things like psychological safety will allow
Yeah.
team leaders to have this rock solid bedrock of psychological safety that they can leverage to make their team feel more inclusive.
Yeah. And having it enshrined in policy is important because it sets the expectation.
Mhm.
But like any policy, any rule at all, if it's not enforced, it's not meaningful.
Right.
So if you're going to put it into your policy, make sure that you are willing to back it up with your actions, or else you are being inconsistent. And we've touched on how that already irritates me.
Right. But the thing too is like, so if you as a person want to know how to make your team feeling, your team feel more inclusive, then if there is this kind of foundational support behind you
Mhm.
that you can leverage to make sure psychological safety is not just you carrying it on your own, terrific. If it's not there, and let's be serious, in most workplaces it's really not there, then you do need to put in your efforts to kind of carry that onus of psychological safety within your team. Whether that's you are the team leader or you are a member of the team, you should bring this forward because it's going to be a big way to kind of allow for it. Because my piece of advice, building on your psychological safety, is kind of what's the functional. So you talk about psychological safety being kind of that foundational piece that
Yeah.
has to exist first. But what are the actions that you could use to really improve making a team feel inclusive? A big one is listening, just listening to people, not just hearing them, but providing that sense of listening to what they are saying, listening to what they're suggesting. And that is really requires psychological safety because it's about, sharing ideas,
Yeah.
sharing thoughts, sharing concerns, sharing, sharing stresses and anxieties. Those are things that people need to be able to have someone listen to them and to understand them. And it's really hard to feel inclusive or to feel your inclusive environment, feel included or that you are an inclusive environment if people don't really listen.
Yeah. And I think an important thing for managers to understand around listening is sometimes there's a hesitancy to open up a discussion for feedback on or for suggestions, or because, well, I can't make every change that people want. So why would I open myself up to that? And listening is not guaranteeing, or building psychological safety and having kind of taking this a bit further in terms of the listening and feedback piece. It's not that you have to change everything based on the feedback, but to show people that you've actually not just heard them, but have listened to their concerns. You need to also, if you're not using their feedback, you need to tell them that, right?
Mm.
If somebody makes a suggestions of, you know what, I think if we did this, it would improve our outcome. Well, that whatever that suggestion is, it may not be feasible. It may not be operationally feasible. There may be restrictions that are put in place, whether it's budgetary or otherwise. But letting people know that, you know what, that's an interesting idea. We're not able to do it, but I really appreciate you bringing that forward because it's given, let's, within the constraints that we have, let's actually figure out how we could get some of the way there, right? It opens up a chance for dialogue.
Right. Well, and so like one of the lines that we use in our training that I really think speaks to what you just said is that listening is the willingness to change.
Yeah.
It's not doesn't mean that you have to change. It doesn't mean that you are required to change or required to change what you're doing or make changes based on the feedback. But if you're listening, you're actually willing to change if feasible, if appropriate,
Yeah.
if practical, if usable. And if you're not willing to change, then you're not really listening. You're just hearing them. You're hearing what they have to say and looking for a way to shut
It,
it down
you're
or pass it
placating.
by. Exactly, you're placating. But with listening being the willingness to change, it's really important to have that willingness be there. Are you willing to do something different if you can, if it's practical, if it's feasible, based on what they have to say? And if the answer is no, then you're not really listening. You're just hearing.
Yeah.
And that's why I say if you really want a team to feel inclusive, people need to know that there is a sense that people are listening to them, that they are actually getting it out there, and that what they say could have an impact. It doesn't always have to, but that willingness has to be there.
Yeah, and I think that leads in. I think there's another element that would make a significant difference or significant improvement in terms of making a team feel inclusive
Mhm.
is understanding how to show recognition and appreciation to people.
Yeah.
It's just it's such a foundational piece of we
Mhm.
all, regardless of background, want to feel appreciated for what we do.
Yeah.
The way in which we feel appreciated is different
Mhm.
amongst our, different people. So, which is why often like formalized or traditional recognition programs tend to miss the mark because they tend to focus on one very concrete way of showing recognition to everybody, rather than from a management perspective or as a leader, understanding how my team actually prefers to show and receive recognition and appreciation. Man, if you can nail that, if you can build psychological safety, if you can transition from hearing to listening, and you can actually show people recognition and appreciation in a way that will be meaningful to them,
Mhm.
you're well on your way. Like those are significant steps that you can take to actually improve how inclusive your team feels.
Well, and I'm really glad that you brought up recognition because I mean, even the way that we talk about it is about recognition has to be timely, authentic, and appreciable,
Yes.
right? It needs to be timely and relevant, needs to be authentic and earnest, but but appreciable is also about has to be something that they understand and recognize it because there's often this bias that if we just give this sweeping everybody good job, here's a gift card and a picnic, you're recognized. That's something that is not isn't is a it's a bit reductive to say that's what a lot of programs are, but those elements are certainly
There are some programs that that's all they
yeah,
are.
that is true, right?
But that is not the entirety of recognition programs, and we
No,
recognize
no, no. So it's like I say, acknowledging it's a bit reductive, but the idea of it really is kind of, it's often not appreciable, and kind of goes back into the listening piece too, right? Like if you're if you're listening to how employees kind of, are expressing how they want to be encouraged or shown or provide opportunities for or those kind of things, that can help make recognizing them and showing appreciation to them a bit easier. Like we have a program, our sevenfold recognition program. We talked about it before. It is really about trying
call
to
us. It's great. Shameless plug.
shameless plug number two. But it really is about trying to improve the appreciableness and recognizing that people really do have different ways that they give and receive recognition, making sure that it's actually landing the way that you want it to. But a lot of that requires psychological safety and listening to be, that willingness to change how we do recognition and listening to kind of what people want is an essential part of it. So I think you're right. I think you're really well on your way to making your team feel inclusive if you can find more ways to make incremental changes and gains around creating psychological safety, listening instead of hearing, and actually looking at it, making recognition timely, authentic, and appreciable.
Yeah. And just on the last thing that I kind of want to say on the recognition piece is what we need to understand, and the way that I would like, if there's one thing to change your perspective on recognition, it would be to understand that it's a form of communication, not to go back and reinforce the previous the question, but it is a form of communication, right? You are trying to communicate that a person feels that you appreciate what somebody is doing. You're trying to communicate that you recognize their contributions. Communication has to be tailored to your audience. It cannot be based on what is easiest or what I prefer to do. So if I prefer to send emails because I don't like making phone calls, this is a dumb example, then, but the person who I'm talking to prefers to have conversations in person, right? The emails are not going to land. it's easy for me because it's what I prefer, but it's the medium that we use, the way in which we craft the message needs to be tailored to our audience. And the same is true for recognition, and making it, as Kobe said, timely, authentic, and appreciable.
So I absolutely accept your statement that I was right in your ultimate surrender. So it's
End podcast.
I recognize that you said I was right. Okay. So this has actually been a great conversation. So I was going to give a quick summary. But
Yeah, you sound surprised.
Yeah, well, it's so is there anything else you wanted to add before I do, or you're good?
No, I'm good.
Okay. So the first question that we were asked was, are organizations underutilizing how they use and build policies, their HR policies? And the answer is largely they are. Often we have this minimalistic view of policies that it's really about just making sure that we don't get into kind of legal hot water, and that's really all that they're good for. But that is a very much again, underutilized view of what they could be. They really could become more of powerful statements, transparent commitments, protections that are used to optimize operations, used to optimize employee performance, and used to structure the organization that will optimize scalability. It's just a matter of it's not a common way that we've used it, but it doesn't mean that it can't be something that we could really invest in to have these clear, transparent, productive documents that are also accessible. If we look at something like an employee handbook versus a policy manual, that employees could actually use and reference and understand that they are protected, they are committed to, there is stuff that is there for them. It's not just protecting the company from them, which is how a lot of policy manuals are viewed today. The second question we were asked is, what's one thing that you could recommend to improve workplace culture? Well, ultimately, it was a stalemate between James and I, despite my last that it's communications, good communication channels that touch on setting and managing expectations, being open to feedback, and making your workplace kind of more inclusive and transparent is really valuable. But also consistency is something that we really can't do without, which is about keeping everyone on the same page. People, knowing what to expect, equitable treatment, stability and reliability. Because again, it's a great statement that inconsistency looks like insanity. So it is something that we want to avoid, that insanity side of it. And then the last question was, how do I make my team more inclusive? And I think we gave some really tangible pieces of advice. I think the first place you need to start is with psychological safety. People need to feel free to speak up, share ideas, thoughts, concerns, make mistakes without retaliation or ridicule. And I think that, that is going to be the stepping stone, the what has to exist first before you can really make a team feel inclusive. Then it's about listening to what people have to say. Listening is, the willingness to change. So being able to listen to people, not just hear them, so that way you actually can, really make them feel like they are included and they belong and that they are heard. And then another big piece is recognition, letting people know that they are recognized, recognizing them in a way that is going to be timely, authentic, and appreciably understood by them is going to be something that, again, makes them feel seen and makes a more inclusive environment where people feel like they belong. All right. So that about does it for us. For a full archive of the podcast and access to the video version hosted on our YouTube channel, visit roman3.ca/podcast. Thanks for joining us.
For more information on topics like these, don't forget to visit us at roman3.ca. Side effects of this podcast may include improved retention, high productivity, increased market share, employees breaking out in spontaneous dance, dry mouth, aversion to the sound of James's voice, desire to find a better podcast.